All right. Okay. Well, it's officially the noon hour, and I wanted to welcome everyone today to the Hops Power Hour, the return of the Hops Power Hour. For those of you that are returning, you remember our monthly webinar series focused on hops production in the Northeast. So we'll be following through with that same type of program this growing season. So this is our official kickoff. And I want to thank the USDA Northeast SARE Research and Education Program for helping to support this webinar series. So I'm Heather Darby from the University of Vermont Extension, and I lead the Northwest Crops and Soils team and the hops research here at the University of Vermont, and I'll be your host today, along with Scott Lewins, that's joining us as well. Many of you know Scott. He's been working with us for a number of years now with the Hops Project as well. Our guest speaker today is Julien Venne, an agronomist and an organic crop advisor at Quebec's Ministry of Agriculture. And he's been working on hops since 2008. Since then, he has nourished his expertise on hops by performing research and development trials, market studies, and by offering advisory services. And we've been working with Julien, I think, since 2008 or maybe 9, and he's been a valuable source of information for us and many growers as well. His presentation today is going to focus on the best early season field practices to perform in the Hopyard. But right before we get started with his presentation, I just want to go over a couple of items. For those of you new to the webinar, if you have questions, you can simply type your question in the Q&A box, and Julien will be answering those questions. It's really up to you, Julien, if you want to answer them as they come in, or if you want to wait to the end of your presentation. Either way is up to you. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll finish up Q&A, and then we're going to do a quick poll, which will pop up 2 questions that we'd like you to answer to just get a sense of what you learned during the webinar. And then Scott Lewins will kind of end us off talking about the Go Scout program this season. So just so folks can put it on their calendar, there we go. Our next webinar will be May 21st, 2018. Aaron Lizotte from the Michigan State University will be talking about powdery mildew management in hops. They have started to see powdery mildew in their neck of the woods. We haven't seen much of any of it here yet, so I figured it would be great for us to learn about powdery mildew and keep our eyes open in case this disease rears its ugly head here. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn the webinar over to Julien. Welcome, Julien. If you want to, yeah, if you want to share your screen now, we'll let you take it away.
All right, is that working out for you?
It looks great.
Good,
So
yeah.
I'm going to mute myself.
Okay.
It's all you. Thanks, Julien.
Alrighty.
All right, bye.
So yeah, I'm gonna have a 30-minute presentation roughly. I got 32 slides to show you guys. And then we're gonna go with the Q&A section of the presentation. So I invite you to maybe keep your questions for the end. So we'll gather them all at the end, because I might cover some aspects covering your question later on in the presentation. So we'll do the Q&A after the 30-minute talk I'm gonna present you. So yes, basically Heather has invited me to talk over spring activities in the Hopyard. There's so much going on in the months of May and June for you guys growing hops. I'm just gonna try to make sense of everything to wrap up things in time. So we're gonna do a task-by-task calendar sort of thing today here. So yes, Heather has mentioned that I'm now working at the Ministry of Agriculture. So the full name here is Ministère de l'Agriculture, des Pêcheries et de l'Alimentation du Québec. I might refer to it again in English. I'll use the acronym MAPAQ if I go at it later on in the presentation. So I will try to switch slide here. All right. So here's the outline. Basically, I want to specify, first of all, that a lot of these activities are only touching major yards. So some of the baby hop yards will not involve the activities that we're going to cover today. For example, pruning, you don't want to spring prune a baby hop, and same goes with some of the herbicide application rates. So you want to be really careful. Today, I'm really specifying that I'm going to talk about major hop plants. So we're going to cover everything from spring pruning to praying, because this is a really, I guess, important aspect of things in agriculture in general. Spring pruning, yeah, I'll just start by defining it right away. People use the term crowning, other people use the term pruning. I kind of gather everything under a spring pruning definition. Crowning is the actual removal of the top portion of the hop crown, whereas pruning in the spring involves the cutting or destruction of the first flush of shoots emerging from the crown and the rhizomes. So it's all the same idea. It's to kind of control the first growth in the spring. So I'll refer to it as spring pruning later in the presentation. Then we're going to touch on stringing and training. Planting or replanting for those of you who have mortality over winter. You want to, refill your holes. We're going to touch on weed control, fertilization, hilling, which is not a really popular practice out in the Northeast, and we'll see why, and we'll see also why it's important to now think about it. We'll go on pest and disease control, really specific to the spring, defoliation, and also summer pruning, which actually starts in the springtime. So yes, spring pruning being focused on sucker management. Well, first of all, I want to just briefly develop on my background on hops. Some of you guys don't know me. I've been presenting at the UVM hop conferences in the past, but for those who don't know me, I've been involved in hops first as a researcher. I've been performing in Quebec a variety trial for 3 years. Then I performed some market studies to know what were the needs in total pounds of craft brewers in Quebec, but also in the maritime provinces. So Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. I'm an author, so I wrote a production guide in 2012, and I've also written blog entries, journal articles, and whatnot. I've been involved with hop pelletization projects, mostly research and development projects. I've been also involved as a collaborator on a hop maturation during harvest window. So this was a project to try to develop a method to know when the hops were actually ready to harvest without sending samples to a lab. And I've also, as Heather mentioned, I've been giving some advisory services, most of it privately from 2012 to 2017. And then today I'm still offering advisory services, but for free as a government employee. And I'm mostly helping out startup growers, because hop is not my main task here at the ministry. It's one of my tasks. So I basically focus on startup growers. I want to locate myself now, because some of you who don't know me don't know where I'm talking from. So yeah, I'm right here in Gatineau. It's actually a city the other side of Ottawa, which is the capital city of Canada, of course. So I'm really on the southern tip of Quebec, Western Quebec here, just at the frontier of Ontario. So, I'm going to cover tons of agronomical principles today. So I always put in perspective that I'm, a bit more north than you guys, most of you guys, especially in the States. I know that there's some participants from Quebec today at the webinar, but for those of you in New England or New York States or Great Lake States, yeah, you have to note that I'm a bit more north than you guys. We're actually at the same latitude or a really similar latitude as the Yakima Valley here in southern Quebec. All right, let's start with the most important technical aspects. Spring pruning, you know about this, you've read it. It's really an important practice, especially for Pacific Northwest growers. So it's done over there and also in Europe and New Zealand and Australia, mostly to control growth. And I say mostly because there's a secondary thought to it. But yeah, it's mostly done to control growth in the spring. So the idea of growing hops, of course, you know, is that you want your vines to reach the top wire on the solstice. So at that time, when they reach the top wire, they'll start to branch to do their side arms. And it's those side arms that will bear the flowers and eventually the cones. So no, it's all a timely thing, but your vines reach the top wire during solstice, you branch, your vines will branch secondary laterals, and then they'll produce flowers in early July. So it's all a timely thing. So that's your target. And then in the Pacific Northwest, the hops come out of dormancy a bit too early for them to reach the top wire during solstice. So that's one of the reasons why they cut them out in March over there. We also want, by spring pruning, to remove the bull shoots. I'm going to present a picture on the next slide to represent what a bull shoot is. And spring pruning is normally done chemically, mechanically, or thermally using propane flamers. And interestingly enough, some of the growers out west will use two techniques in one spring. So in the same field, they might do it both mechanically or chemically, So yeah, the two strategies will benefit each other, and the idea is really to remove all the material emerging, all the first flush material emerging from the plants. And so yes, it was a common practice done in the spring to control growth, but then some hop pathologists got interested in that practice, and they understood that spring pruning is a great tool to control fungal diseases. So the idea is that within that crown, there are fungal spores, downy mildew and powdery mildew spores among all, that have hibernated in your buds on the crown. And the idea is to remove that fungal inoculum to get clean shoots emerging from your crowns and rhizomes, okay? So this is a crown, a typical crown in the spring. And I've mentioned that one of the reasons we want to prune it in the spring is to remove some bull shoots. So you see the bull shoots here are the tallest shoots, okay? And the definition here of a bull shoot is pretty vague, but the interesting or the most important thing to note here is that bull shoots have a lower count of nodes, okay? So the nodes are those junctions here where your leaves are attached to the shoot. So the bull shoot have a lower amount of nodes per length, okay? So they're typically really growing fast, they're long, but 1 feet bull shoot will carry 3 or 4 nodes, whereas a normal healthy vine will carry up to 8-10 nodes for the same length. And what you need to know is that those nodes are where eventually later in the season your laterals will be formed. So you want more nodes to get more laterals and get more yields. So bull shoots have a low count of nodes, and that's why you want to basically destroy them in the spring, because they will yield less hops later in the season. So when I mentioned that that mechanical pruning was often used, this is how it's commonly done. This is an apparatus that's it's hydraulic. It's fixed to the side of your tractor. And in this case here, you got the head where you can fix different attachments. And on this head, you got here 2 discs that are rotating and chopping the first portion of your crown. Crowning can be done above ground. It can be done on the surface or below ground. There's some research on it. It's very depending on the variety that you're growing. Another here similar tool, which has another capacity. On this head, you see that there are some vertical discs here on the side of the apparatus, and these vertical discs are used to chop down the rhizomes, so to minimize your hops from, or to prevent your hops from going within the row. You want to keep your rhizomes and root system on the hop row. So this is also a crowner, but it has also vertical discs to cut down rhizomes. This is the UVM tool. It's actually a hand-operated tiller. which can do the job, of course. You can also use a weed whacker with a blade, works too. But you gotta use tools that will do a clean cut if possible. So you really want to be careful about that. You want to do a clean cut on your plants, not to injure them too much. And this is a hooded sprayer. This is how a grower using desiccants will prune their hops in the spring. They'll use hooded sprayers, which will direct your herbicide, your defoliants, straight on the hop rows. So it's a direct spray using those hooded sprays. And this is a picture taken from the Field Guide for Integrated Pest Management, written by Gent et al. In 2010. And this is an infamous picture now, I guess, where you see clearly that the material, the shoots were really cleanly crowned mechanically in this picture. So there's nothing else emerging. So all that inoculum residing in those shoots has been destroyed. And so you'll start with fresher material emerging from the crown, and that fresher material shouldn't or hopefully will not bear fungal inoculum. So it's really important to really clean all the shoots emerging from your hop crowns and rhizomes. All right, so there's a bit of a controversy amongst growers as to prune or not. And here's a list of considerations that you want to have before making a decision. And I really want to underline here that, in agriculture, you're dealing with nature, so it's always a gray zone. It's never black, it's never white. It's always a gray zone, and you have to base your decisions on an annual basis. And you also have to make your decisions based on the variety that you're growing. So it's really an annual decision. I really want to specify this here. It's going to be influenced by the weather, by the disease pressure and whatnot. So here are the questions that you want to ask yourself before taking your decision. First of all, what was the disease pressure last year in my hop yard? If I had a high disease pressure from downy mildew, for example, on susceptible varieties like Centennial, well, maybe I want to prune this year because I know that my crowns are bearing a lot of downy mildew inoculum. So I want to get rid of this disease to start with in the season. Another question is, how is the spring so far? Is it an early spring, a normal spring, or a late spring? Well, if in the case of this year, for example, it's a late spring, and in another case, I have healthy plants, so they're not too diseased, and they didn't suffer too much from downy mildew or powdery mildew last year. Well, in this case, maybe I shouldn't prune, because if I prune in the late spring, my second flush of growth will take time to occur, and my vines may not reach the top wire in time. So if I prune, I might decrease my yields. So again, this is another case, and I take a different decision. Another question to ask yourself is, how vigorous are my plants? Am I growing Saz, Centennial, Srirachaeace, or am I growing, Chinook, Nugget, or Columbus? You have to ask yourself, if I prune, will my hop plants have the time to reach the top wire in time? Okay, so if it's a normal spring, and I'm growing low vigor varieties, maybe I don't want to prune them because I know that they're not going to have the time to climb up to the top wire for the solstice. Whereas if I grow highly vigorous varieties, well, it gives me more flexibility. I can maybe prune a bit later in the year for them to have the time to reach to the top wire. So I hope this is clear. We can get back to it in the Q&A, but really, as for spring pruning, it's a complex decision, and you should really take the time to think about it before pruning or not pruning. So stringing and training, this is a bit of a straightforward slide here, especially for you guys that are already in the hops. Well, first of all, there's not enough research in the Northeast to give precise recommendation, and that's in general. So after that, if you ask me precise recommendation for a specific variety, we cannot do it professionally. It wouldn't be professional to do it because we don't have the information. What I can tell you is stringing should be done as early as possible. So that can be done, for example, as soon as you're done pruning your yard. And then it just gives you time to train when the vines are ready or when you have time, depending on your situation. And your bines, you know, they should be, you should try to correlate the day that you train to the day that they will reach the top wire. So, you know, depending on your area, depending on the heat units that you're receiving each spring, depending on your soil, on your production type, if you're organic or conventional, it might influence your training date. But basically, you have to figure out yourself for your varieties on your side, when is the proper date to train your bines for them to reach the top wire. So this is, you know, only from experience that you're gonna get to know it. But mostly what I can tell you is in Quebec, it's in our area, southern Quebec, it's mostly done late May, early June, but it's really varying from site to site. Now, the number of bines per string, it's influenced by a lot of things. In some countries, they'll go up to 4 or 5 bines per string with low vigor varieties because they really want to boost their yields, and they'll make it up with a heavy fertilization program. But for you guys, it's important to see it in terms of varietal vigor. So if you have a really highly vigorous variety, you might want to train less bines, okay? Because you want to have less biomass up in the air to limit fungal propagation. You want a clean, aerated site, so you don't want too much foliage on your strings. So varietal vigor is the first thing, and varietal biomass is another thing. A variety like Brewer's Gold, for example, makes up for huge leaves and big stems. I mean, if you go with 4 or 5 or 6 bines per string, you'll get a really heavy, a lot of biomass and poor air circulation in your yard. So at the opposite, something like Cascade might benefit from more bines per string, because you know that Cascade produces smaller leaves. It has a lower harvest index, so it can breed even if there are a lot of bines per string. You also have to account for phytosanitary risks. We're seeing more and more Fusarium canker in our yards in the Northeast. And so when Fusarium canker affects your plants, it can basically kill a whole vine to itself. So if you're having history with Fusarium canker destroying several of your vines, you want to maybe train more vines per string to limit your yield losses at the end of the season. Basically, as I mentioned, there's not much research research results currently available. So you have to do some home testing, consult with your peers and with your specialist, your regional specialist, to try to get some answers. But home testing is going to be really one way to go if you want to know what's going on for your varieties on your site. All right, I've mentioned planting. I really want to focus on replanting. So, you know, if you got some dead plants, you want to replace them. You know, there's still people going with rhizomes these days, but for me, it's a no-go. There's no good reason really to go with rhizome as a plant stock. They can carry rhizomes. They can carry diseases. I've seen it more than often misidentified because they're shared amongst growers, and some people lose track of what's planted where in the field, and so they pull off rhizomes, and it's not labeled for the proper variety. So I mean, and they really do spread disease across yards. So there's no really good reason to go with them. Another problem with rhizomes is that they require more time to become established plants, or to yield established plants and good yields. It could take typically 2, 3, 4, 5 years to get a really full harvest from a rhizome. Whereas if you start with clean plants material, you can get a full yield on year 2. If you don't harvest on year 1, you let your plants photosynthesize in the fall. On year 2, these babies will produce you a highly mature crop. We've seen in Quebec growers on year 2 obtain a 2,500 pounds plus per acre. So it's really showing. There's no reason, no incentive to go with rhizomes at all these days. Go with clean stocks produced by a great supplier, a reliable supplier. Weed control. So yes, this is interesting. On the row in our areas, People have been using mulches a whole lot. The reason why mulches were so available in the past few years is because basically in Northeast states and even in Great Lakes states, we didn't have any or we didn't have much herbicides available for hop production. So we had to find some alternative ways to keep our hop yards clean. So mulches were heavily relied upon, and I think they're still interesting for new yards, or for, of course, organic yards where herbicides are not available. For new yards, it's the same thing. I mean, lots of these herbicides currently being registered in our regions are not to be used on baby hops. So you're still stuck with the same problem where it's difficult to control your weeds early in the year or in the life of a hop yard. So on year one, mulches can really be helpful to keep your yards clean. Killing is also a great way to control your weeds. It's only efficient in a specific manner, though. It's going to be efficient against your weed seedlings. So you want to, pull dirt on those seedlings to kind of choke them, but it's not doing any good if your weeds are mature or if your weeds are at the seed stage. Other weed control methods and control, of course, on the row, flaming has been used by some growers. Of course, this is the handheld flaming equipment I'm talking of here. And there's also people trying sheep as alternatives. And between rows, it's kind of equally important to control your weeds between rows, because ultimately in a hop yard, you're going to end up with more perennial weeds. And if those perennial weeds establish themselves in between the rows, they will eventually, with their rhizome system or whatnot, they will be eventually able to go on your hop rows. So you want to really fight those weeds between rows, especially some stuff like quaggrass, of course. So cover crops are going to be useful, especially on clean sites. If you start with a clean field, cover crops will be perhaps doing the job. But otherwise, if you're having, a high quaggrass population, for example, cultivation is going to be the way to go for at least a few years to get rid of that quaggrass rhizome system in your yard. So, and don't, of course, we want to limit erosion. We want to limit soil erosion between the rows, but cultivation is still a key aspect of things in the hop yard to control some specific weeds. So don't overlook cultivation, specifically not in the short term. And yes, herbicides are starting to get registered in our regions. So I don't have a complete list for the Northeast states because it's varying across states and across countries. So we in Canada don't have the same products as you do for hops production. But stuff that we have in Quebec now, pre-emergent products are starting to be available. So in Canada, we have now a lion, for example, and Daziflam available for hop production. So this is applied when the hops are dormant. So otherwise, you are risking crop injury. So before applying any pre-emergent products, make sure to read the labels really carefully. And you have to time your applications right. And you also don't want to apply these products on baby hops, on first year hops. So really look at your label, and in some of the states, you might have other notices on your herbicide labels. For example, none of them are compatible with all varieties. So you might want to do some tests in your field before applying a pre-emergent product in all of your hop yard. You want to do it in patches to see if all your varieties are tolerant of these products. Post-emergence products are also available. So for example, the grass controlling herbicide clethodim, very available in various packages here in Canada as different products, I want to say. And here with those products, you also have to check out the label because they're only efficient at certain times. So in this case, for us and on our label in Canada for clethodim, it's really specified to apply it early when the grasses are up to a certain amount of leaves. For example, you don't want to apply your clethodim on mature quadgrass; it won't yield much results. So you want to apply it when it's the time. So you want to check your labels for that. And of course, post-emergence desiccants are available. So we have here in Canada carfentrazone ethyl, or AIM, that's registered for hops. You can use it, of course, but here also the timing is critical and the dosage is also critical. And for some of these products, you really want to apply them with adjuvants for the products to stick on the plant leaves, whether it's the desiccant or the anti-grass products. Fertilization, I just want to see what time it is. All right, I have to speed up a bit. Fertilization, well, again, we have some data, we have some considerations, but we don't have precise lists of data to give you guys. We don't have specific recommendations for fertilization of hops in the Northeast as of now. What I can tell you, what we are seeing in the literature is that the nitrogen target should be between 135 to 220 pounds per acre per year. The phosphorus target is from none to 100 pounds of P2O5 per acre, and this is of course going to be depending on your soil tests. And same with the potassium, in fact. So the potassium target will be from none to 200 pounds of K2O per acre per year. So here the message is, don't guess soil tests, and chat with your agronomist, with your local agronomist to see what kind of target you could fix yourself in a year. And of course, it's going to be depending on your soil type. It's going to be depending on your yield expectations. If you have high yielding varieties and you have a great soil with some heat, well, you can target high yields. But if you have a cold site and you're growing low vigor varieties, well, you can decrease those targets. So you're gonna use the low range for nitrogen, for example. This is the key graph that we're all relying on when doing our fertilization recommendations. It's basically a graph showing you, you've seen this, but I really want to go at it again. This is the date here where the researchers have sampled the plant biomass, the trained biomass, so the above ground biomass in the yard. And what they're showing here is that the growth of the plants will really occur in June up to mid-July here. So this is the area, or this is the period of time where your hops are really going to need nutrients. They're going to need it at that time. So it tells us that nitrogen fertilization, for example, should occur at that time or before, depending on the product that you're using. But there's really not much sense of going with high applications of nitrogen in August, because your plants have already taken up the bulk of their biomass and consequently most of their nutrients. So timing is key for conventional N applications. So I mean some conventional fertilizers. You want to apply them from early May up to early July because they're fast. They're becoming plant available pretty fast. For organic N applications, we'll see in a minute, because there are some thoughts that we need to have with organic N applications, because they mineralize slowly. Okay, so they become plant available much more slowly than conventional N fertilizers. For conventional N fertilizers, you do not want to apply more than 20 or 22 pounds of nitrogen per acre at once. Otherwise, you just encourage plant growth too rapidly, and your plants are going to get susceptible to the diseases, especially fungal diseases. If using manure or compost, you want to apply them in the fall before hilling. We'll go back to hilling later on in the presentation. And why so? Well, again, this is an organic compound. Organic nitrogen will take time to mineralize. So you want to really apply it in the fall, so that in the spring, as the soil warms up, you already get some mineralization in May and early June. So this is already done. And also you want to apply it in the fall before hilling, because it's important to incorporate in the soil that manure and that compost. You don't want to let it sit on top of your rows, you want to really incorporate it in the soil where your plants are growing. Otherwise, you don't really benefit from your manure or compost. Phosphorus-based products should be applied in the fall or early in the spring. The rationale here is that phosphorus does not move much in the soil, so it's not really mobile. So if you apply it in the fall and you incorporate it in the soil, it will stay there. It will stay in that root zone, and it will be available in the springtime when the plants need it. And you want to apply it really. You want it to be available for the plants early in the season because phosphorus is a key nutrient for root development. Potassium should be applied also early in the season or mid-season, depending on the products that you use. So again, you don't want to go with potassium applications in August. It's not really worth it. Organic fertilizations. Here are the considerations I was referring to. Basically, we'll do a case scenario here. Let's say I have a high-yielding variety like Cascade. I want to get a pretty good yield out of it. I want to get, for example, 200 pounds of cones per acre. So I want to really go with a high fertilization rate for nitrogen. So let's say my target is 175 pounds of nitrogen per acre. We'll make up for what's, or we'll estimate what's the end contribution from the soil organic matter. Let's say it's 25 pounds of nitrogen coming from my organic matter and becoming plant available in the springtime. Let's say I've added some manure in the previous fall and that I'm going to get a 50 pounds nitrogen contribution from my manure application from the previous fall. So I need now, I can count now what's my with the residual that I need to apply to my plant. So my target of 175 minus 25 coming from the organic matter minus 50 coming from the manure equals 100 pounds of nitrogen that I need to apply otherwise with either pelleted poultry manure or feather meal. I know in the States you might have some Chilean nitrate too or Chilean nitrogen. There's various sources, but all in all I need to supply my hop plants with a supplemental 100 pounds of nitrogen. Let's say that the material I have near to my farm is pelleted poultry manure. It's 532. In order to get that targeted 100 pounds, I'm going to have to apply 2,000 pounds of pelleted poultry manure per acre. Here's the problem. The problem is that pelleted poultry manure contains organic nitrogen, and the organic nitrogen takes time to be mineralized. Okay, it takes roughly, after 8 weeks, you get only 25% of that nitrogen that's been mineralized and that's become plant available. So all in all, what I'm saying here is that you want to be careful when assessing your fertilizer needs when in organic production. You want to really use high rates of fertilizers in the springtime because the mineralization is low. And you really want to focus a lot on your manure applications in the fall because it will be really important in supplying your plants with nitrogen early in the season. You want to maximize basically your manure applications year in, year out in the fall time. Okay, so that you don't have to rely so much on pelleted poultry manure or other fertilizers in the next year's season. Because in this case, we won't reach our 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre if you just rely to your feather or to your pelleted poultry manure. Fertilization, other aspects to think about here. I would use, in all cases, agronomical support to fix your decisions on the rates, but also on the products that you want to use. For example, here, some products should not be used in hopyards. Potassium chloride should never be used. Potassium chloride should never be used because the chloride part of the fertilizer is toxic to plants, to hop plants. You shouldn't use acidifying fertilizers when you're growing your hops on low pH and you're having problems raising that pH. So for example, urea, you want to let it go in that condition. And if you're using a drip tape to fertilize your hops, you don't want to use sulfates if you're using calcium nitrate or vice versa. There are compatibility problems between some fertilizers, so you want to make sure that you know which products are not compatible when mixing them in your fertigation system. So again, agronomical support will help you know these things, and they will help you to get a clean, efficient fertilization program for your farm. All right, hilling. Yeah, hilling is a popular practice worldwide. It's done not on all farms, but on several farms, especially in Europe. The reason why we don't talk so much about it here is, as I mentioned before, growers have been relying on mulches a great deal in the previous years for their weed control, and you can't really hill when you have a mulch on your row. But you know, with new herbicides being available, I think that people will move from the mulches to just having no mulch and growing hops on hills. So what's the benefit of hilling? Well, it can contribute to enhance your crown vigor. We'll see in the picture what I want to see or say here. It contributes to weed control, as I mentioned. When pulling dirt on top of weed seedlings, you can control them. It can also enhance drainage. So when you have a hill, you have some enhanced micro drainage in your root zone. You can also limit disease when hilling. So for example, if you're having fusarium canker issues on your farm, well, by hilling, you're going to solidify the base of your plants, and they're going to be, your vines are going to be less susceptible to fusarium canker. Hilling, as I just mentioned also a few minutes ago, it will be really useful to incorporate your fertilizers on your hop rows, and same can be done with limestone, manures, compost, and so on. Hilling in Germany, for example, it's done 3 times a year normally. So it's done in mid-June. It's also done in July and then in the fall. So in the fall after you're done applying your inputs. So when I was mentioning that it can enhance crown vigor, this is what I really want to mean. This is an unhilled crown. You see that after this winter here, this is in the spring, after the winter, after the freezing and thawing, the crown was pulled up of the ground, right? And so this is exposed, and this is, you know, susceptible to be injured or killed if there's a heavy frost coming. So by hilling, by hilling in the fall, you don't get these crowns that are exposed so dramatically in the spring. So you can really enhance that crown structure and crown health with hilling. These are some tools that can be used for hilling. This is a disc, a vertical disc that's actually going to be fixed with the same attachment I was showing you guys a few minutes ago for the crowning. So this is attached to the same equipment. You just interchange the head here, and otherwise you can just, you know, work with vertical discs behind your tractor, and these discs will just, you know, hill your hops. So you just have to work with tools that are going to be proper with the soil that you're having. And this is an example of a really beautiful yard that's been hilled. So you see here the hills are really, you know, they're important. They're roughly 5 inches off of the soil surface here, and you see that's, you know, really helping drainage, and you can really see that it could also help on incorporation of fertilizers, even in the spring. I mean, if you're using granular phosphorus fertilizers, for example, in the spring, well, hilling can really be useful to push them towards the row and incorporate them in the soil. All right, quickly on pest and disease control. I'm going to focus here on downy and powdery mildew because there are 2 main concerns here in the spring in the Northeast. So the first thing is prevention. You know, it's always the #1 tool. It starts actually, you know, before planting. So you want to select a clean site with, you know, good aeration. You want a warm site. You don't want a site that's surrounded by bush or wood. You want a site that's exposed to the sun early in the morning so that the sunlight will let that dew go away early in the morning. Okay, you want to get rid of that dew as early as possible, so you don't want trees too close to your hopyard. Variety selection is going to be the key thing, of course. You know, if you're going organic, this is going to be so important. You don't want to go with Centennial or some really disease susceptible varieties. The row spacing, you know, If you're in a valley and you don't have much airflow in the Hopyard, you want to use larger row spacing, maybe a minimum of 14 feet between your rows. Scouting is also an important prevention method, of course, and maintaining good airflow is also it also involves manipulation. So you're gonna want to control your weeds at all times during the season. So between the rows, as is within the row, and you want to seek and destroy those infected plant parts. So those flag shoots for powdery mildew or those basal spikes or downy mildew. You want to walk your field and pull them off and destroy them outside of your yard. Now, with regards to chemicals, you want to plan ahead your fungicide program. So every winter at this time of year, you should review the list of available products for your area that are going to be registered for hops. You want to buy your products ahead of time. You want them in your warehouse, ready to go when you need them. You don't want to purchase them the day that you need to apply them. You want to plan for product rotations. So you want to switch from one fungicide group to another. You don't want to apply the same fungicide again and again without rotating with another product. And every time before you spray, even if you're an experienced grower, it's good to check your labels. Sometimes labels change. So go online, check those labels, and review them for hops. Michigan State University just came out with a brochure on downy mildew and powdery mildew management, and they specify that Grandman, Zempro, and Revis are heavily used in Michigan. It's the same here in Quebec and I guess Ontario. We don't have Grandman, but we have other thiazolfamide products. So yeah, there are 3 effective fungicides, and rotations are based on them heavily, depending on your re-entry intervals and whatnot, because they change from one state or one country to another. But they're interesting products to use for sure. Curzite, Tannus, and Alliot are other tools considered for upgrowers in some states. They may not be registered for your states. What I can tell you is that these products are currently not registered for hops in Canada, so we're not using them as of now. So check it out if you have them available, and they can complement those 3 products here after. Organic products are also useful, well, especially for organic growers, because you don't have much choice. There's not a broad variety of products available. Copper is often fitting in some conventional fungicide programs too. But really, with those products, you want to understand that they don't have, most of the time, they don't have post-infection capacities. So you want to apply them before disease infection. So you want to apply them before wetting events. Okay, you want to try to apply them so that there's some residual activity on them when disease is gonna be coming to your plants. So these products, the organic products, are used more in prevention than for actual post-infection treatments. Defoliation, well, you know about this. Defoliation can be done by hand, of course, but with carfentrazone, ethyl, and other desiccants being available in our regions, now people are moving towards those products. It's really easy to do it by hand, but you need to remember that mechanical or manual defoliation can carry diseases from one plant to another one, whereas chemical desiccation or chemical defoliation will avoid this problem. So if you're having issues with, for example, upstunt viroid, you definitely want to go and defoliate your plants with a chemical defoliant and avoid using your hands or other tools to do the job, because otherwise you can propagate your viruses or viroids across plants, across rows, and even across yards. Summer pruning, so this is in the States or in the Pacific Northwest and in Europe, it's typically done chemically with desiccants. So for example, gramoxone, carfentrazone ethyl, or other products like Ignite. It's mostly done with a hooded sprayer. Some people in our regions don't have hooded sprayers and they'll use wands. Works too if you can really direct your spray accordingly. It can also be done manually, thermally, or mechanically. But again, if you're doing your summer pruning, if you're pulling out, destroying those suckers manually or mechanically, well, you may again contribute to disease propagation within your yard. So that's another thing that you have to think about. It can also be a varietal decision. So for some varieties that are disease resistant, you might want to go at them mechanically or manually. But if you're having problems with downy mildew in some susceptible varieties, you might want to prefer using chemicals to do your summer pruning. And yeah, summer pruning sucker management should last until late July. After that, you want to let your hops grow. You want your shoots to re-emerge from the soil so that you have some biomass after harvest, and that biomass that will keep on growing in late August or September will still perform phytosynthesis and re-nourish the rhizome and crown system. So you want biomass later in the season. So sucker management should stop late in July. Yeah, I was referring to thermal spring or thermal summer pruning. It can be done with a torch, but you have to be really careful using this type of equipment. It's not really easy to use, but it's totally feasible. And again, for organic growers, this can be a really interesting alternative to desiccants. And for the most adventurous of you guys, you can go ahead with this kind of tool used in France. This is actually an hydraulic brush with rubber fingers, stripping the bottom of the vine, so doing the defoliation, and also controlling the suckers. But again, you have to be kind of precise and awake when doing this. Otherwise, you can end up with surprises, I guess. And so I guess this is I believe this is my final slide. It's basically, we're ending spring here. This is summer solstice. We're done, stripping here with defoliation. We're done managing our suckers. We've healed. The weeds are under control on the rows and pretty much under control also in the alleys. And yeah, this is a picture of a clean looking yard for late June. So this is it for me. Heather, do you want to go with the Q&A?
Yeah,
section?
So if folks have questions, please type those into the question box. We'll have about 5 or 6 minutes to answer some questions. If you can't figure out how to use your question box, just type it into the chat box, and we'll be able to see that. Actually, I'm not sure if you have a chat box, but put them in the Q&A box. Right now, I'm going to post a couple of quick polls. If you wouldn't mind answering these questions while you are trying to think about all the questions you're going to ask Julien. So if you can quickly answer the poll, that would be great. We'd really appreciate it. I'd like to also suggest that if folks have ideas for webinars or speakers that they would like to hear from, please let us know. We did get some feedback from a couple of attendees, so it's always good to know what people are looking for. You can either send us that by email or type it in one of these boxes here. It seems like there's a lot of boxes, but type it somewhere. All right, I think we're just about done with the quick poll. Okay, I think I'm going to end the polling. Thank you for answering that. All right, and I'm going to see, we have 4 questions in the chat box. Can you see them, Julien, or do you want me to just ask them?
No, I can see them.
Okay, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. So Ron Brennan has a question. Hello, Ron. Do I apply all 2,000 pounds pelletized poultry manure at all once? Well, ideally, maybe not. Maybe you want to do it in 2 batches. I understand that you can do it, weekly, because it's going to take time for them to mineralize the nitrogen. I would do it maybe 2 times, depending, you know, if you have the equipment and time to do it. Otherwise, I mean, it's not as big of a deal as it is with conventional and fertilizers, because again, because the pelletized poultry manure won't mineralize quickly, you won't have this big push of growth from the plant. So, you know, it's not a big issue if you do it at once, but I would definitely try to do it, you know, on 2 or 3 split applications. And you could even start maybe in the fall time. You know, it's already there, it's not going to move. In the fall, it's really cold, so you won't get much mineralization and leaching losses from your pelletized poultry manure if you apply it, you know, in late September, for example. Simeon has a question: how tall should you allow your bull shoots to grow before cutting them? This is a good one. You probably want to let them grow as much as possible, and it's not actually the bull shoots that you want to grow. It's you want to allow those buds on the crown to emerge. Okay, so you want to let them. You want to leave time so that they do emerge. So if you crown too early, most of your buds won't have emerged, and so you won't get rid of that inoculum growing in those buds. So you want to leave time. So in the scientific literature, they say to crown as late as possible. So this is just the answer I can give you. Crown or prune as late as possible in the spring, and if as late as possible means May 1st for your plants to reach the top wire, well, May 1st is your latest target date for crowning. Do you know of any suppliers to purchase hop plants, against Simeon? I would probably only talk about the Clean Plant Network. So if you look online for the Clean Plant Network and its services on hops, you will have some trails there to find some clean stocks. Luc Fortin has a question. Hi, Luc. With that very late spring, 3 weeks late in Quebec, what date do you think will be the last max date to prune? This is a good one. In warmer areas, you might be able to prune this year if the hops go out of dormancy in the next few days. But again, they need to grow some if you want your pruning to be efficient. So if they're only a couple of inches tall, your shoots on May 1st, I think I would not prune this year at all. It's a really late spring, and for some springs, you know, pruning is really hard to do. I would perhaps only do it, you know, a late pruning if you had really diseased hop plants last year. So if you really want to fight, you know, your downy mildew on disease susceptible cultivars, you might still you might still do your pruning in the first week of May or so.
Well, I think we've answered all the questions. So I just want to thank Julien again very much for your time today. And I'm going to turn the webinar over to Scott. He's got some updates for us.
Thank you, Heather. I want to just take this opportunity to welcome the 60 returning participants to our project, as well as the 20 or so new folks joining us, as well as those folks that are watching this recorded Power Hour after the fact. So this and all of our Hops Power Hours are available on our YouTube channel, as well as a lot of information about our hops project here in Vermont. I also want to just talk very briefly about the Go Scout program, as part of this project. It's a quick survey that we send out to the participants every few weeks. It's an opportunity for us to learn about those challenges, particularly related to pest and disease management, as well as fertility management that you folks are dealing with. But it also really gives us an opportunity to direct upcoming Hops Power Hours to best meet the needs of all the participants. As Heather mentioned, our next Hops Power Hour will take part at noon on May 21st. Erin Lizotte from MSU Extension will be talking about powdery mildew management. And then, as we do with all of our Hops Power Hours, gives us an opportunity to check in with you guys about this ongoing project. So, as Heather mentioned, this is a Northeast SARE supported project, and the R is research, and the research components that this project is hoping to address is, you know, a number of different pieces involving crowning to reduce downy mildew management. It's something that we looked at last season, as well as quantifying the impacts of natural enemy populations. We hope to also address the question of optimum nitrogen rates for hops, as well as screening some hops germplasm for some potential varieties. So again, I want to just encourage everyone to fill out those Go Scout surveys when they're sent to you, and I look forward to seeing everybody in a month from now for our next Hops Power Hour. And I think it's just about noon here. And so Heather, unless you have something else that you want to add, I just, again, want to thank everybody for joining us for this informative hour, and especially our guest speaker, Julien, for sharing his wisdom.
Thanks, Julien. Hopefully we'll see you soon, and everyone have a great day. Hopefully it's nice where you are. It's beautiful in Vermont, so we're headed out to get some field work done. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.